Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. I'm Regan King. It is the 9th of November. This evening I'm joined by my friend and co-host for tonight, Alistair Scott. Good to have you on the program, Alistair.
Great to be here.
Do please keep in prayer Simon, who is struggling with COVID at the moment. Pray that he would be well soon. Simon, I'm confident you're watching the program. Our well wishes are with you, and we will continue to remember you in our thoughts and prayers. Be well soon. And hopefully I'll do you proud sitting in your seat this evening as we talk about the Israeli elections. This is an election special, is what we'll call it. The return of King Bibi, some people are billing it. What impact will that have in Israel following yet another election? How many have we had now, Alistair?
5 in 3.5 years. It's the fifth one in 3.5 years. So it's almost as many prime ministers as we've had in the last 3 months.
There we are. We were talking a little bit before the program, and for ages I was thinking Israeli politics, it's an absolute chaos. It's very difficult to understand and make sense. One day you have these people in power, the next day it seems like you have someone else. But we cannot talk. In the UK we've had absolute chaos this year, and certainly the international situation really needs our prayers. But Alistair, tell us a little bit about your initial reaction to the elections that have just occurred in Israel.
Well, one thing that for sure, there's been a lot of prayer going on. I mean, similarly to the situation in our own politics situation in this country and government situation here, there's been Christians praying all the time, and Christians also been praying for the Israeli elections, because as I said, 5 in 3.5 years, it could so easily have been a kind of apathy growing, because you think, oh, well, this is going to be 6 months and we'll have another one. But it seems to have done the trick, because it certainly has had the highest turnout in many years of people voting. So, and we were talking about this earlier. I believe for sure, we seem to be in the season, don't we, of elections. There's the Brazilian elections, which have just recently happened. There's the American midterm elections, and of course the Israel elections. And without doubt, in these times where there's so much shaking going on, I mean, it's like Hebrews 12 is in this season, isn't it? The shaking of the nations. We need strong leaders. Doesn't matter whether you agree with their politics or not. The main thing is that they are. I've always cried out and prayed out, Lord, raise up politicians or leaders of conviction rather than preference, that they'll choose a route in order to be popular. It's not meant to be populist, it's meant to be what is right for the nation. And I do believe Netanyahu is a bit like a Winston Churchill character. In fact, Winston Churchill is one of his great heroes of recent history. And he is strong. He's certainly a man who understands financial security as well as the security of the nation of Israel. So I think I felt it was a good result, not for political being far right, far left, or anything in the middle, but I just think he's a strong leader at a tough time, and we do need that.
Absolutely. Now, just to recap what's happened here, the nation went to the polls on the 1st of November, and there's, as part of the election, an appointing of 120 members of the Israeli parliament called the Knesset. And the Knesset saw on this occasion as many, I think there's still a couple of votes outstanding, but the projection at the moment is 65 seats awarded to Netanyahu's right-wing bloc, and then the rest are scattered between various center parties, and only one really very left party, which was previously the strongest party in Israel, Labour, which was very much a socialist party. It had an unbroken reign from the days of Ben Gurion to Rabin. And so now we've had 20 years of a right-wing government, or a center to right wing government. Labour in this election only came away with 4 seats. So some are saying this has been really a dramatic downfall of the Israeli left. Now, as you said, 5 elections in 3.5 years. After the 2021 Israeli legislative election, the next election had been scheduled for no later than 11th of November 2025, according to the 4-year term limit set by basic law. The government, the 36th government of Israel, a national unity government formed between 8 political parties following those elections. It held the narrowest possible majority, 61 seats in the 120-member Knesset. So all it needed was the departure of one individual to put things at an even stalemate between the right and the left, so to speak. We'll try and simplify it. It is a bit more complicated than that. But if you had 2 individuals leave that coalition, instant minority, need for other elections. And that's exactly what happened, because ideologically, this consortium of parties, they united around one thing: getting Netanyahu out of office. Yeah. But ideologically, they were so different, it was not going to work. And it didn't work. It's been completely powerless, really, to affect meaningful change.
Yeah. I mean, it is a big problem, isn't it? We've sort of experienced it not so many years ago when we had the coalition government here with the Liberal Party and the Conservative parties having to work together. And it didn't really work because they ideologically, they're so different from one another. And the ones that you're relying on to keep your majority is always going to try and get kind of manipulate things for their gain as well. And it didn't work in this country. But to be honest, in Israel, they almost always have to have some kind of coalition. Either the right coalition gather together because they're all on the same sort of ideology, or else, like they had to try and do in that election you've just been talking about, join together across the centre left. And it didn't work because it was never going to work from the start, simply because the leadership, even the fact that they had to agree to a 2-year span for 2 different leaders, there was a weakness there even at the top. Yep. And therefore, as soon as one or other of the smaller groups feels they're not getting what they want to do, they just swap over or they pull out, and therefore you have to start all over again. And this is what happened, sadly, for the 5th time in a very short period. They just couldn't have agreement. They couldn't even pass their financial arrangements for a year, the budgets for the year, because there was disagreement all the way along. So it's not surprising. And as you just said, it was such a close difference. It was 61 against 59, and of the 61, a few were debatable anyway, because they were kind of central government, but could have leaned to the left or the right. So all it needed was one person to change sides. And this is what happened. Well,
exactly. In April 2002, Atid Silman quit the governing coalition and left it without a majority. And then in June, following several defeats for the governing coalition in the Knesset, Prime Minister at the time, Naftali Bennett, and then the alternate Prime Minister, now outgoing Prime Minister Yair Lapid, announced the introduction of a bill to dissolve the 24th Knesset, which was approved on 30th of June. Simultaneously, because they had this agreement of a rotation in government, agreement part of that 2021 coalition deal, Lapid became the Prime Minister and continued leading a caretaker government until the final results of this election, which are almost about to be attained, following which we'll see the president instruct Benjamin Netanyahu to form a coalition within 28 days, which seems like he will almost certainly be able to achieve.
I mean, there's no guarantee, isn't it? This is one of the problems with it. So even once President Herzog says to him, yes, you've got the majority, form a government, there still could be problems. And, I'm reminded of that wonderful scripture in Psalm 133, behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And if there's unity in the nation will begin to look at the potential or the probable dangers that are around them. At the moment, there's been so much flux in how things are going on in the land that it's been difficult to even look beyond its own shores.
A question for this evening for you to mull over. Will the return of so-called King Bibi bring more security to Israel? That's what we're asking this evening. Now, here is a helpful news report by our friends at CBN prior to people hitting the polls, just encapsulating a little bit of that frustration of voters and their hope that they would finally be able to see a majority.
We're here at a Jerusalem polling station where Israelis are voting for their 5th time in less than 4 years, and they're getting pretty tired of it. So we came here to ask them what's important to them. So why are you here today?
I'm here today to try and make a difference. We all have to take a part in making sure that the country is looked after and taken care of.
Who are you voting for today?
So in America, we don't tell people who we are voting for, so I'm carrying that over with me.
Today I'm voting for Itamar Ben-Gvir.
I know I'm voting for Meretz.
We cannot say. It's classified.
Don't know yet.
I vote for Bibi. He's a great leader and he has experience. And that's what we need in the Middle East.
For Yair Lapid, because he's shown that he's a very successful person. He's managed to do a lot of things in the short time that he's been a prime minister, and he's also quiet.
I don't want to say.
Saar, who's going with Gantz, so I guess Gantz in the end of the day.
We don't usually talk about that, but I'll tell you, Benny Gantz. Basically, out of default, I would like to be the ideologist who believed in a better future, two-state solution and all that, but I'm also a realist. I don't see that coming in the next few years, and therefore I'd vote for default somebody to at least keep us safe.
What's the most important thing to you in this election?
That we actually get a government and we don't have to keep voting, and we get people in there that actually do their job and do what they say.
Actually, it's the justice, because currently the terrorism don't get punished like it should be.
Well, there's two things that are important. First of all, the fact that there's no ecological agenda in any other party except Meretz and Avodah is absolutely astounding, that you can have in 2022 parties that don't talk about the environment. And the second part is that they have a commitment to resolving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
It's stability and, of course, security.
For me, it's important economic.
The security, the economic, to be together. All these people must to be together. If we be together, we're going to beat all the problem and everything that is in Israel.
Stop the rift we have in the people between the left and right, religious and non-religious, Arabs and Jews.
Financial improvement, security, and democratic, legislation.
So what do you expect as an outcome from these elections?
No, I don't know. I'm nervous. I hope the extreme doesn't take over the agenda.
I hope it will be the last time. We need to stop to fight each other and to make the decision to be together, and I hope today that it will end.
Just 4 years of non-elections, so we can forget about it.
I enjoyed our last government, even though it didn't last that long, because of the unity aspect of it. But I think we're going to have another election very soon.
I think that it will be 50-50.
Yeah.
The same thing. We're going to get the 6 and the 7 until somebody will be smart and take all of them together and start to work.
I hope we won't have another election, and I hope it will be a definitive voting. A Zionist government without any non-Zionist parties.
Well, thank you to our friends at CBN for that helpful news report. I think it does go to show some of the fundamental concerns that people had when they were approaching this election, matters of security and economy being primary, just the need for greater stability. And certainly in Netanyahu, there's this familiar face, this strong leader, this character who has been able to show that strength, even though there's often been much adversity. You know, for the past year, Alistair, there's been the opportunity, and I'll say I was hopeful that we would see something good come out of this coalition. I was hopeful that there would be a measure of success known, and that Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid would be able to be a bit of a breath of fresh air and bring some renewed energy to what seemed a pretty arid landscape politically. And yet, you know, ironically, the very ones who talk the most about wanting to achieve growth and stability in the economy and greater peace with surrounding nations were unable to accomplish anything of any import, while as the one who's been criticized routinely in our media for being right-wing and painted almost as if he's a warmonger or something, was able to achieve, along with President Trump and various others, the peace established the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, the Abraham Accords was such a success. I mean, I listened to an interview with Netanyahu recently before the election, and he was saying how much he was involved in that, because I know Trump has taken most of the glory for that, but he was very much already talking with those nations and preparing the way. So he did more for getting peace. Okay, the difficulty with Iran is huge, and the Palestinians is huge. How they could ever solve that problem is almost beyond my comprehension. But he was certainly working with the United Arab Emirates and, you know, Morocco and all those other nations in good conversations. And of course, with America behind it, it became a very probable and possible ally. And you can see all of those nations in the Middle East do see Iran as a bigger threat to peace than anything else. And therefore, it's not surprising that they can gather together and ally and work with Israel. And I'm sure this will develop a lot more once this government is officially formed, and Netanyahu continues to reach out to the Saudis, perhaps, and to those other nations around there, and see this alliance getting stronger and stronger. Because, you know, every nation has tried this, haven't you? You try to appease by agreeing to give financial backing or financial economical favor to nations, thinking that they will change their ways. But, you know, the truth about the whole Palestinian-Iranian policy is they're not keen on they're not really wanting to agree to a two-state solution, because they want a one-state solution with Israel non-existent. They want the Jewish people put into the sea. Right. So it's very hard to negotiate with a people who really don't want to negotiate. It takes two to tango, and I think, you know, most people have put the finger towards Israel when really the finger's pointing in the wrong direction.
I 100% agree with that. Just to remind viewers, it's interesting, the inconsistencies, as they say, Alistair, consistency is a rare jewel. We have widespread condemnation of Iran and the heinous way in which they treat their own people in Iran at the moment. The protests are all over the news, and various media outlets are covering the human rights atrocities being committed by the Islamic regime that's there. A reminder that Iran is the primary sponsor of Palestinian terrorism. And so you support the systems that are there in Gaza and the West Bank. You support what's going on. You are expressing support at the same time for Iran, which is its primary backer, which is also involved, as what we'll see in a few moments, in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So the irony of a lot of liberal media is it's condemning Ukraine, it's condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it's condemning Iran, but for some reason is supporting an attempted state. It's not a state, a Palestine which is primarily sponsored by Iran. One of its main contingent, Hamas, of course Hamas is only a part of the complication in Palestinian territories, but Hamas's charter pledges the destruction and devotion to the entire destruction of all Jews. It's genocidal. This is what we're dealing with here. The people of Israel have spoken. Looks like with most almost 100% of the votes in that Netanyahu's bloc is going to have as many as 65 seats, with the left-wing bloc barely scraping to 45. Some of the individuals who were interviewed in that CBN News report a minute ago supporting Meretz and other left-wing groups completely obliterated in the elections. That there were around 250,000 votes that went to parties that did not cross the electoral threshold, that if they had gotten behind one candidate could have equated to 7 extra seats in the Knesset, and that just didn't happen. But here is a report now in the aftermath of the election from our friends at CBN talking about what to expect in coming days.
The main possibilities to join Netanyahu would be the Religious Zionist Party, as well as the ultra-Orthodox United Torah Judaism and Shas parties.
I think Israel is supposed to be democratic and Jewish. I don't accept the separation. I think that if Israel will be more Jewish, it will be more democratic, and it will be more democratic, it will be more Jewish, because the public in Israel is very strong in its Judaism.
Knesset and Religious Zionist Party member Simcha Rothman has seen an upsurge in support during this round. Many supporters come from communities in Judea and Samaria that have been sidelined by the current largely secular government and recently attacked by terrorists.
Israel is a very conservative society politically, in the way of life, in the culture, in the family. The second Israel will be able to decide its faith democratically, you will see the people choose more Jewish values, because that's what the people in Israel want.
Jews of American and European descent primarily make up the UTJ party.
The main two goals, first of all, to promote the interest of the ultra-Orthodox society, to support it financially, to give, for example, exemption from the army for the ultra-Orthodox men, the ability to study Torah, the support for the institute, the education system.
According to Gilad Malach of the Israel Democracy Institute, the party wants a stricter version of Judaism within society.
And the second thing is they want to promote keeping Shabbat as a day that there is no market, no transportation, to be more strict regarding conversion issues to Judaism and other religious issues.
Shas Party supporters are very diverse.
The voters of the Shas Party comes from all over. We have votes from the Arab villages. We have votes from downtown Tel Aviv. We have votes from Jerusalem. We have across the country. Because people understand for a stable future for the kids, they need to vote for Shas. Because no matter who you vote, you need to bring the following day bread to your table.
While the Religious Zionist Party and UTJ push for a more strict definition of who is considered a Jew and therefore allowed to immigrate to Israel, the Shas founder had a broader view.
Rabbi Avad Yosef was the only chief rabbi of Israel that recognized the Jewish people from Ethiopia as Jewish. And it's known that people from Russia get recognition straight away that you're Jewish.
They also support the peace process.
Shas Party is the only religious party that joined the Rabin government in 1992. And we want peace, we're running for peace.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
So hopefully that gives you a little bit of perspective as to what's going on and what to expect in coming days. Alistair, Netanyahu has succeeded, but as we've already mentioned, there's going to be a coalition, or there needs to be a coalition in order for him to have a functional government. He will probably be the prime minister. If he can piece this coalition together, he definitely will be. But the coalition is almost certain to include groups that are, I think, fairly described in some cases as far right, especially the Religious Zionist Party led by Ben Gvir. What are your thoughts on this?
I agree. I've been reading the same kind of reports over the last few days as well of the far right part of this potential coalition, and being very anti-messianic and anti-Christian. But you know, that's the other reason why you need to have a strong leader. And because if you ever listen, I mean, we were very fortunate earlier this summer to actually be invited to a breakfast with Netanyahu and his wife in London. And it was a tremendous time, and you were able to go and speak to him personally. He was open to that. And he always, every time I hear him speak, okay, he's a good politician, so that's possibly part of the motivation. But I believe he really believes it in his heart when he speaks his thankfulness to the evangelical Christians around the world, and even those in the nation for what they've done. I think he's got to be more cautious about talking about Christians in the nation for obvious reasons. But he does have a good heart and appreciation for nations that have stood with him, but also the Christian body, which you know surpasses a single nation, and the way they have stood and prayed for Israel. So I think having a man like him who has an allegiance and a friendship with Christians would really help if there's some kind of manipulation going towards maybe even furthering the attacks against Messianic congregation in the land and the Christian ministries that are in the land. I'm sure he would stand against that and would stand for supporting those people who are doing great works in the nation. So you know, you've been to Israel so often, and despite the fact that they are accused of being apartheid states, it's the only nation in the Middle East where on a Friday night I can hear the Islamic people in Jerusalem praying to very loudly praying to their God, and every other Christian group or different religious group have their meetings at different times, and that's what makes them a democracy, and that's what makes them a land that we should be allying with, because they don't try and force Judaism on everybody. So I'm convinced that having a right-hand party coalition with Netanyahu as a leader would work, but it needs prayer. We know this, you know, definitely, how important it is to keep praying for the nation, that it stands out as a beacon of light in what is sometimes a very dark area of the world.
I think certainly if there can be moderation by Netanyahu on Ben Gvir, the leader of the Religious Zionist Party, to some degree, and in fairness, they have toned down some of their rhetoric in the past couple of years, some of which in the past has been undeniably hateful and inflammatory. But if they can moderate what they say and moderate how they are in relation to some of these concerns, particularly around security, and develop more of a willingness to talk through some of those disagreements with the left side, it might, I think, work in a much more healthy way. Certainly, it can't be much worse than the past year. So I think we are looking at a more successful situation going forward. I was in Jerusalem some years ago now and was able to see just that love and the sense of prayer for Netanyahu and for Israel as a whole, to be fair, from the evangelical community with its annual the annual Jerusalem March, and you know, Christians from all over the world coming, and you know, quite regularly Netanyahu will address that and will in some way express support and thanks for that. So definitely we should continue to pray for him, as I hope we've prayed also for this most recently failed coalition.
I think they also see, you know, there's the annual Jerusalem prayer breakfast that's held. I mean, it hasn't been held for the last couple of years because of pandemic situation, but it's held regularly in Jerusalem, and it brings Christian and leaders from all over the nations standing with Israel, and I think that gets a lot of acknowledgement, not only from Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, but the President Herzog particularly has been very, very vocal in his praise for the way the Christians in the nations are coming in and standing with Israel. So yeah, it's a good sign.
One of the interesting features of this particular election has been just the exposing of the Israeli left wing's fragility. Commenting for Jewish news syndicate, Daniel Greenfield has responded really to this question, what has led to the collapse of the Israeli left, saying, Yair Lapid, a television celebrity and the son of a famous father, is Israel's Justin Trudeau, a convenient front for the same old gang to run things while he mugs for the camera. He's one of a line of retired generals and public figures fronting fake third parties who hold office only long enough for the public to realize that they didn't vote for Labour but got it anyway. So as we said already, Labour only won 4 seats. But what Greenfield is saying for the Jewish news syndicate is that essentially Yesh, Atid and other parties that are being described as centrist are in reality ideologically still socialist, very left-wing. The electoral decline and fall of the Israeli left was caused by 2 national revelations. The first was that Netanyahu's free market economic policies, while not perfect, worked far better than Labour's socialist monopolies. And the second was that Labour's signature policy, cutting a deal with the PLO, was a murderous failure that threatened Israeli lives and the country on an unprecedented scale.
Yeah, this is an ongoing thing, and I think, you know, the country is united behind Netanyahu at the moment, realizing the priority must be the security of the nation, because the biggest threat is coming from Iran. They are constantly threatening, and we talked about it a little bit earlier about the human rights problems within the land, and there is like a rebellion going on within Iran, which is great, because if anything's going to pull down a regime, it's got to start with your own people really coming against it. And sadly, when those things happen, it usually causes a lot of death and destruction, but long term it achieves its aim. But I think without a doubt, Israel is concerned for its own security from particularly from Iran, if Iran gets the nuclear capability, and it seems to be developing really fast. So that unites. But I was thinking about politics generally. You know, we talk about the Labour group, which is really socialist in Israel. There has been a move. We've seen it in our own nation, haven't we? Where the old Labour just isn't popular anymore. I mean, you know, going back to Blair and Brown, they were almost more conservative than the Conservatives when they got elected, because they'd moved to the middle order, knowing that the far-right socialist thinking is not part of the European psyche anymore, and certainly not part of the British psyche. And then when they did lose, and you've got Corbyn came in, back going towards the old-fashioned ways, and that didn't work either. He was not popular at all. So you can see why this has happened in Israel too. There's a move towards the right, because the right is concerned for security, concerned about economy, concerned about growth. And so it's not surprising that we've seen this change coming around, and we do need a balance. We do need people on the left and the right, otherwise you're going to get, the danger then is you get into a fascist sort of situation.
Nationalistic type.
Absolutely, and we don't want to see that in any nation. But I think just like Blair and Brown realised that the Labour Party had to change its face, I think probably the same would have to happen in Israel too.
And for so long, the left wing ruled Israel for decades. It was the primary party, and I mean, you can even look at Israeli sports, and you can see so many of them have that background and that rooting in Hapoel, the working man ideology. You can still see some of the very Soviet-esque type logos and stuff around, but it does seem that with 20 years now not in that situation, there have been moments where more centrist government has been there, but as a whole, the society's improved. It's become more secure. The wall, which has been very protective, guarding against, I mean, in the past, my wife tells me of how you would drive by one particular area and there would be youths, Palestinian youths, who would be throwing bricks down on vehicles. And many people were killed, unfortunately, in that sort of thing. Now they have a wall which provides more security from that sort of situation. Of course, there's the other technology responses that have grown in recent history when we've had rockets fired into Israel. There's greater security, greater realization, I think, by Netanyahu that, okay, we're not negotiating with terrorists here. We're not going to go down that route. The economy is generally better under the right-wing side of things. Now, that article by Daniel Greenfield in the Jewish News Syndicate commenting on the Israeli left's downfall notes this paradox, which I definitely have seen and heard of. I'm curious as to your thoughts. The paradox, he says, of the Israeli left is that it has virtually no electoral power, yet nearly unlimited political power. There may not have been a Labour Prime Minister since 2001, but the left still controls the machinery of officialdom, from local bureaucrats to Supreme Court justices, even while the media declares that the latest right-wing bogeyman is a threat to democracy. It is the civil servants, the prosecutors, judges, brass and administrators who actually run most things and who are a real threat to democracy. Then he goes on to kind of make the comparison between that scenario and the inspiration even that the Democrats in the USA take from the Israeli Supreme Court with its ability to override government decisions on everything from macro to the micro, from where people can live to who should receive the Israeli prize. As their motto. Greenfield says, beyond the upper echelons of the judiciary, prosecutors openly collaborate with the media and leftist activists to indict, prosecute, and remove conservative, patriotic, and Zionist elected officials. But this could change, and I think is changing, as immigration continues. Immigration into Israel is seeing Israel become more right-wing.
Yeah, this needs to change, doesn't it? I think we kind of recognize we have the same problem in the UK as well. It doesn't matter if you have a change of government. It seems to be the civil servants in the background who manipulate or bring changes to the front. And I think, look at USA under Trump. He did try and totally turn that thing around with the Supreme Courts and so on, in order to get people who are more open and perhaps more open to the right than to the left. But this tends to be the problem, isn't it? When you have an election and you have one side in control, they want to change everything from the left, or now we have, like in America, the Democrats are in control, they want to change everything that Trump did, simply because he was a Republican. And I think it's time for politicians to grow up. The only thing, I'm fairly old, older than you. I can remember the 60s and the 70s, and whether you were a Conservative or a Labour, it didn't really matter to me. It was more about conviction. Right. I would look for people who really believed what they were saying, and I think there was a season of that, where particularly as it was after the Second World War and the devastation that caused, similar situation to what we were talking about in Israel. After 1948, when they became a nation again, a state again, they had to fight war after war. So I'm not surprised the Labour kind of idea of being closer together was successful. But then, you grow up and then you need to get the economy running, and that's what seems to have happened when the right have been in control. So I mean, it does concern me that we need that sort of leadership again and politics again that really cares. Doesn't matter, not just pleasing your own supporters, but thinking about what is best for the nation. Because if you do that, not only will your own supporters benefit from it, but so will those who are in opposition. And then you can start to, I mean, it's almost idealistic, but it's what I would love to see is people working together for the best of all, for the best of the nation, for the security of the nation. And I think there's more chance of that coming with Netanyahu in control and this present potential government, which could be formed by the end of this month, than it was in the last 2.5 years of the chaos that we've seen in Israel. And it's my prayer for the nations. If God is in control and God is Lord and He's exalted in all the nations, as it says in Psalm 46, we want to see godly rule. We want to see the fear of the Lord. We want to see righteousness exalting a nation again, not only in Israel, but in our nation, in the USA. I see that there is a need for governments to govern and not be swayed by the people who seem to have the permanent jobs, who are there beyond the 5 years or the 4 years of the elections. So that needs some control. It needs righteous control rather than, a far-right type of control.
Absolutely. Now, it certainly seems as though there's been some positive reception in the international community to Netanyahu's re-election. In fact, I was somewhat surprised to see how supportive many of the world leaders were without expressing any disclaimer or without saying, we want to resolve this situation in regard to Palestine. We had the French President Emmanuel Macron congratulate Netanyahu on Sunday, saying that he had called Benjamin Netanyahu to congratulate him for his victory in the elections. We share the same desire to strengthen the already strong ties between Israel and France. Macron tweeted, which I think is very good because France has in the past few years had such a heavy presence of anti-Semitism, and it's been growing. To have the leader of France speak on a public platform in that way, showing support to Israel, showing support to Benjamin Netanyahu is a very big step.
Yeah, it's very, very refreshing actually coming out of France because, as you say, there's been so many anti-Semitic attacks going on in the nation, and it doesn't seem to really represent what how the EU have been or the European Union have been regarding Israel. They tend to be further to the left in their thinking than supporting Israel. And again, I mean, they believe in the two-state solution, which would be perfect if the two states on either side were in agreement, but they never will be. So it's very refreshing to see Macron speaking in a positive way and talking about having the same ideals as Israel, because that is new. And I noticed that our Prime Minister was also amongst those who congratulated. It tends to happen whenever there's an election in any nation, congratulations come fairly swift, but it was a little bit slower generally this time, and the nations in Europe that stood with them are the nations that have been standing with Israel over the past few months and years, really, like Poland, like Hungary, like some of the nations that the rest of the EU don't like too much, like the UK. But the sad thing about for me on the UK side of it is, although the Prime Minister is very positive towards Israel, he has immediately come back with this statement that we will not be moving our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which we had all been kind of hoping was going to happen. Jerusalem is the capital of the nation, whether you like it or not. The capital of any nation is the nation where the government sits, and the Knesset isn't in Tel Aviv, it isn't in Haifa, it's in Jerusalem. So we need to really, even in a political way or a geographical way, we should acknowledge that is the capital, and therefore let's have our embassy where the capital is. Can you imagine if a nation, like say the USA, decide, we don't want to acknowledge London as being the seat of the government, so we're going to put our embassy in Manchester. Right. That's ridiculous, because the embassy is meant to be where the government seats, and if the government changes to Manchester, then all the embassies should move there. But Jerusalem must be the place, and I would really like to see our government have a rethink on that. He's got enough on his plate, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
But let's hope he hasn't just put that completely off.
It's been interesting to observe because, of course, previously we had Prime Minister Truss expressing support for a move of the embassy to Jerusalem. And in the past, Rishi Sunak has been, he's on record as, and there's film footage of that, him discussing his own personal belief that Jerusalem is the historic capital of Israel and that it makes sense to have the embassy there. And he, with some disclaimers, expressed that while he was sure that there were some complexities that he would be exposed to in should he enter office, which of course he now has, that he would be exploring ways of making that happen. But it seems as if there's been some backtracking. Doubtless there's intense pressure for some years now. The UK has been very unsupportive of Israel. It's actually only been in the relatively recent past that's begun to shift a little bit, where we've begun to see a little bit more understanding of the problem of anti-Semitism, a little bit more understanding of the need for Israel as it's the only healthy democracy that's in the Middle East. There's begun to be a recognition that okay, the problem may not be with the ones who routinely say they desire peace as long as the other side lays down its arms. Maybe the problem is with the side that's constantly launching excess numbers of rockets and, using their children as shields. Maybe they're the problem, not Israel. So I do feel that there's been a little bit of a shift in the past 5 years. Not entirely, not nearly enough, but it would be good to see Prime Minister Sunak revisit that, and hopefully he will. There's definitely still some time, but Netanyahu was congratulated by the Ukrainian President Zelensky, and there was much outcry. I looked at his tweet, which read, "Congratulations to Netanyahu on winning the elections. It's always important to see real democracy in action," which is a massive statement of support for Israel and its system. Israel and Ukraine share common values and challenges that now require effective cooperation. We hope to open a new page in cooperation with the new Israeli government for Israel and Ukraine's benefit. And I was just looking at some of the reactions to this, and people who've been lauding President Zelensky in Ukraine, who've been so supportive, who've been putting the Ukrainian flag in their social media bios and stuff, and really being quite right advocates for Ukraine, expressing shock and disappointment and outcry that Zelensky's expressed congratulations, saying, hold on, what's going on? Obviously, he recognizes Israel's legitimacy, and so many still don't, particularly those anti-Israel leftists on social media. But it was good to see Zelensky express that support. And Netanyahu has pledged to, of course, look into how Israel can help in the Ukrainian situation. It's complicated because there are so many Russians and Ukrainians in Israel, and they've needed to originally try to be a peacekeeping force in some way in that, but without negotiations on the horizon. I think with Netanyahu there will be a firmer line taken.
I think the complications are even more so because of Russia's permanent threat to Israel. Well, if you help them, we will open the doors for the Syria border and so on. So it's a hard line politically to walk, because you don't really want to alienate one of the major nations, powers in the world. You want to keep as good relationships as you can, but and I know that Ukraine have been looking to Israel to help not militarily, but armory-wise, with their incredible Iron Dome systems and so on. And Russia are watching and warning and saying, don't get involved, because if you do, you're only a small nation, and we can open the doors against you. But then, that's part of what we know is going to happen in the end times. Nations are going to rage against Israel, and then, but God is for them. So God will, the biggest ally is that the Lord is for them and not against them. And no matter what the nations may rage against them about, it's just going to bring us the return of Yeshua, Jesus, to rule and reign out of Jerusalem.
Eventually, President Biden in the United States, he was towards the end of the list of people sending in their congratulations, but he did get there, eventually congratulated Netanyahu 6 days after the election. There are still concerns that the relationship with the Biden administration could sour, especially if the Religious Zionist member of the Knesset, Ben Gvir, receives a prominent place in Netanyahu's government, which he's almost certainly going to as part of the coalition agreement. At the same time, Netanyahu has expressed to Biden he hopes to work together towards more peace with Arab nations. That's a top item on his agenda. He desires to expand those Abraham Accords that were introduced during President Trump's tenure, and that surely will be a good thing. He's talking about various alliances with Saudi Arabia as well, and that would be a massive step forward to peace across that whole region, and hopefully there would be some inspiration in those nations from Israel's democratic model. But definitely there is that concern, and I imagine Netanyahu is going to be expressing that more and more. The USA continues to try to procure an Iran deal in regards to its nuclear projects. And I think that this is where politics, they say politics makes strange bedfellows. You have the USA rampant in its condemnation of Russia, rightly so, in regard to its invasion of Ukraine, trying to achieve peace and certain deals with Iran, a massive and stated opponent of the United States, even more so of Israel, sworn to Israel's destruction, really. They're trying to achieve that through Russia. It's bizarre. You can't make it up.
It doesn't make sense at all natural, isn't it? But there is a huge risk going on with the Iranian situation, because I think even amongst the leadership of USA, they realize if they do get the nuclear deal up and running, the danger is they're going to come against Israel. And I heard a quote that Biden had spoken to Netanyahu and said, I love you, Bibi, but you need to come over to the two-state solution, come over to this being the only solution to the problem. And, Netanyahu would say, if you could get to two sides agreeing, as I said earlier, yes, then give them a two-state solution, let them have a different piece of land. But if you give them the land that they've tried to get and they've been offered in past, not so long past history, and they still refused it because they want everything. They don't want half, they want the lot. So there needs to be a waking up going on in the American politics too, that you can't force a two-state solution unless there's some kind of reliability in an agreement. But at the moment, I don't see that. I don't see any reliability in any form from the Palestinian stroke, Iranian stroke, other allies with Israel and being the beneficiary in it.
Yeah, absolutely, and definitely that's a specific area that viewers you can be praying in regards to. Now, as we begin to bring the program to a close, the question that many will be asking is, okay, well, what impact will this have for Israel's security? On the surface, you can look and say, yes, okay, politically speaking, perhaps Netanyahu's new tenure is going to see greater national security achieved. We can't say that for certain. We definitely can't say on the grounds of what the Bible teaches us, that Israel will not face threats, because it will. We know that in the last days there will be all nations coming against Israel. That's there in the scriptures. And yet, as we consider how God has allowed and appointed Benjamin Netanyahu, as he allowed and appointed Yair, Lapid, and Naftali Bennett for the past year, he has put him in this place for such a time as this. We pray that he would be an advocate for the people who are in Israel, of wherever they come from, that he will be able to procure a good relationship with each party, that the extremism will be balanced out on both sides by clear, measured, strong leadership and good communication. Ultimately, though, Alistair, we have to recognize that Israel's security isn't in King Bibi; it's in King Jesus. That's where Israel needs to look.
There's the old scripture in Psalm 20, that some put their trust in horses and chariots, but we will remember the name of the Lord. And that's the truth. The nation does need to look upwards rather than sideways. And of course they can be very proud of their achievements, the armory, the Iron Dome system, all those other things which are incredible. But ultimately it's the Lord God, the God of Israel, who is their protector. He is their defense. He's the defender. And we need to pray that into being. And certainly my prayer for Israel as a people is that they would look upwards and start to recognize the one they've pierced, the Lord. We call Jesus, they call Yeshua, as the Messiah, who he really is, and see him as the protector of their nation.
Well, I hope that this has been an enlightening episode of Behind the Headlines for you, our viewers. Thank you, Alistair, for joining, and I ask that you would please continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and continue to pray that God would give help to the nation of Israel. Bless you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week on Behind the Headlines. Have a good night.